Hi, everybody. It's Stuart Stevens. I just wanted to talk on this beautiful Saturday here in Vermont a little bit about the White House Correspondents Dinner. Um, you know, I went to the White House Correspondents Dinner a zillion years ago. I used to kind of go sort of regularly. I always thought it was silly but vaguely harmless. But the last time I went, which was long before Trump, I remember leaving thinking, you know, the Taliban isn't perfect, but they would know how to deal with this. And what happened last night, it's beyond embarrassing, it's beyond shameful, it's evil. Because Donald Trump is an evil man, and what he's doing to the United States and the world is evil. And when you are complicit to evil, particularly when your reason you exist is to hold evil accountable, you become part of this evil machine. And I really don't understand it. I mean, what are these people thinking? It's one thing when, like, dumb people do dumb things. Donald Trump's a dumb person. He does dumb things all the time. It's another thing when, like, really smart people, and they're really smart people at that White House Correspondents' Dinner, do dumb things, stupid things, irresponsible things. I don't get it. I really don't. Is this something they think they're going to be proud of in 2 or 3 years? 5 years? How about today? Um, what this is, you become part of a machinery of normalization. And this is so much about what Trump is about. It's normalizing having a bunch of masked thugs, heavily armed, chasing brown people around the country and murdering people. It's normalizing a death squad. They're trying to normalize having these people involved in our elections. It's trying to normalize attacking juries. It's trying to normalize election denial. It's a fundamental attack on the United States and everything that we stand for, the rule of law. And you go along with this? You shake Jeffrey Epstein's best friend's hand? Really? Then you eat dinner with that same hand? Man, how does that feel? I don't get it. Um, but it's shameful. But shameful is sort of the least of it because it's really, really dangerous. And what Trump has done is he has shown these weaknesses of so much of our society. First, it was the Republican Party, the party I used to belong to. Trump realized in some animal sense that if he told Republicans, all I have to do is give you power, you'll go along with everything that was against everything that you said were deeply held beliefs, values, first principles. Not a problem. He understood that. That's why he ran as a Republican and not a Democrat. He'd been a lifelong Democrat, maxed out to all these Democratic politicians. But he realized he couldn't do this in the Democratic Party, that they would reject him, just as the Democratic Party rejected George Wallace. But the Republican Party, they would accept it because ultimately, all of these values that we posited as so deeply held turned out to be just marketing slogans. So then Trump gets elected, and then he gets reelected. And now you have the great law firms of America, some of them like obeying in advance, which is the great Professor Schneider says is the first rule of what you should not do when you fight tyranny. Don't obey in advance. You saw it with great educational institutions. You saw it with business. Really? Does Tim Cook think anybody's going to remember anything about his time at Apple except when he knelt and gave this golden offering to Donald Trump? Really? Do you think that's not going to be what you're remembered for, dude? I mean, I'm sorry, man. That's it. Your choice. You did it. That's who you are. That's what you'll be remembered for. And he knew with journalists. certain journalists that he could stand up there and insult them as he did from the first day. And they didn't know what to do about it. And, part of the problem with Trump and our society and the role of journalism is journalists were brought up that the greatest good was objectivity. But how do you tell both sides of a lie? And look, I've published 9 books. I've written hundreds of articles. I imagine if you took the average uh, output of the journalist at the White House Correspondents Dinner, I've written and published a lot more. And I'm published in everywhere you can think of. New York Times, Washington Post, Esquire, Washington Monthly, every place. Outside Magazine. Um, I even wrote a column for Food and Wine at one time. So I think I would kind of qualify for a journalist. Certainly qualify as a writer. But objectivity isn't the greatest good. And it only works if there's some sense of at least both sides trying to adhere to some sort of norm. And that didn't happen with Trump. And it doesn't happen with the Republican Party. Republican Party is not a normal political party. It's an extremist movement. So are you going to go cover like the Red Guard like it was just another student movement? I don't think so. I don't think you should. But actually, if you go back and you read the New York Times coverage of the Cultural Revolution, they did kind of cover it that way, kind of like it was a big Woodstock. Um, so you've watched journalism struggle with Trump. How do you deal with what he says that you know is not true? And it's been a progression. You say, well, he misspoke. He didn't, instead of just calling out and saying the guy is a fucking liar. And every other word that comes out of his mouth is a lie, which is what they should do. And this is why so much of our journalism has cracked and is dying, and why media like Lincoln Square is coming forward. Because, we don't need anybody's permission to do this stuff. We don't have any corporate overlords. Nobody's calling us up and saying, I don't know, what's this going to do to our stock prices? And people sense this about the media. Look, the New York Times, they got out of the White House Correspondents Dinner a long time ago, and all credit due. And the New York Times has survived and thrived and grown at this moment, unlike any other so-called legacy media. And all credit due to them. And look, everybody out there, I have probably spent more hours in my life arguing with the New York Times and arguing with journalists and campaigns, because that was my job. But that's how it's supposed to work. And it's very rare that I felt that the person I was talking to was not listening, was not giving it a fair hearing. Sometimes they would agree, sometimes they would disagree. Most of the time they disagree, but that's okay. That's how it works. I got asked after the Romney campaign, did I think the press was biased? And I said, no. And I got a lot of shit from that, from everybody on the right, all these Republicans. Of course they're biased. And no, my point was, there was a certain thing that happened with our press. And there's a fascinating comparison. If you go back and you read The Boys on the Bus, Timothy Krause's brilliant book about the press coverage of the 1972 campaign, where he decided he was just going to write about the press. Read that book. And one day in the Romney campaign, I took a piece of paper and I wrote down who the leading journalists were in The Boys on the Bus and what their background was, and who the journalists were who were covering Romney, who were on the plane. And the difference was stark, and it wasn't bias, it was experience. In 1972, to cover a presidential campaign was the epitome of your career. And when you looked at who was on the bus then, about a third of them didn't have college degrees. About half of them had been in the military. They came from all over the country. They weren't all Ivy Leagues. And then when you went to who was covering the Romney campaign, and these were, a lot of them were a lot younger. Some of them, this was really their first beat. Now, more often than not, these people have gone on and done great work. But it was just sort of a different role of the press and how to treat it. And I was lucky enough to be on campaign planes with people like David Broder. And they covered the campaign entirely differently. But now, look, I'd say to all my friends in the press, don't you realize what is going to happen to you if you keep doing this? And you think that you think of some great victory that these subpoenas got knocked down. One of the great problems we've had with Donald Trump is the inability to imagine Donald Trump. And I certainly was guilty of that. I couldn't imagine him winning the primary. I couldn't imagine him winning the general. Then after the insurrection, a lot of people couldn't imagine him ever coming back. So, that was one of the excuses Republicans used not to vote to convict him. And if I had said in the summer of 24, we're going to have an army of masked men with a budget larger than the Marines, heavily armed, under Stephen Miller, a psychotic fuck direction, murdering American citizens as a death squad, you would have said, calm down, dude, calm down. It's not going to happen. Yeah, but it is happening. And the thing to ask yourself is, what are you going to do when it's not a subpoena that shows up at your door? What are you going to do if it's like ICE or a variation of ICE showing up at your door? How are you going to handle that as a reporter? Because don't think that can't happen. And if you go back and you look at how Pinochet emerged, journalists ended up being disappeared, exiled, and yet they still wrote about Pinochet. They didn't normalize Pinochet. So I would just plead with you. In the Republican Party, we used to say, don't negotiate with terrorists, which of course turned out to be just another Republican lie. But don't think you can feed the alligator and it'll eat you last, because it doesn't work that way. Donald Trump is an existential threat to everything that you believe and everything that you do. He's an existential threat to you, your family, your profession, and the country. And wake up and just accept that and fight it. It's exhausting. It's ugly. You don't want to believe it. But by not believing it, it's the fastest way to ensure that the worst will happen. So, thanks to everybody out there. Let's keep fighting. And thanks to all the great journalists in legacy media and not those who are writing, talking, and publishing on these free means like this. These voices have never been more critical. Thanks. Have a great weekend.